Blog Talk Radio.
NETCHEM Afurakanu Afuraitkaitnut Ineye Odida Medinde Ojirapo Kwesi Nananom Akan. Akamumana Maruka Etipibu Ojirapo, that means greetings to all Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning African black people. Today is Ojida Day, Purification Day. My name is Ojirapo Kwesi Nananom Akan, Ojirapo of the Akamu Nation in North America. Yet I'll say we thank you for tuning in. Apologize for the couple of minutes delay, couple of technical issues that we got worked out. We're going to place some links in the chat room. First link, actually, the link for the publications. You can go directly to the publications page where you can see the Ubin Sheng that we mentioned in the promo for the show. Ubin Sheng book, Ubin Sheng, The Ancestral Summon. And then also the ntem. You can access both of those publications directly from the publications page. You can download the ebook version of those. And for the individuals who are new to the show, we have 3 shows on a weekly basis on our channel, on our ODWIRA channel. On Mondays we have, which is Joada. Monday we have Akan for Nananom, Ancient, Authentic, Akan, Ancestral Religion. And we deal specifically with the Akan expression of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African Ancestral Religion. Number 1, because, of course, we are Akan. Number 2, because there's misinformation that has been perpetuated in the Western Hemisphere about Akan culture and philosophy and ancestral religion, as well as from the continent, misinformation coming from individuals who have been infected with Islam, Christianity, and white culture just in general over the past couple of centuries. So there's misinformation coming from individuals who are attempting to corrupt the tradition and force-fit it, for example, into a monotheistic structure, which, of course, is nonsensical, as well as misinformation regarding the nature of the Supreme Being, the nature of the deities, the nature of the ancestresses and ancestors, and the culture itself. So we deal with the Akan expression on Joada on Monday, on Akan for Nananom. On Wednesdays, on Wukuda, we have Egua Marketplace Day. And what we do there is we interview individuals who have businesses, organizations, institutions, serving Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, of course, but yet also transmit our ancestral religious values as they serve our people through their businesses, organizations, and institutions. In connection with that, we've also published the Akan economic development model, which is an approach to economic development rooted in Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religious values. We published that model. If you look on our Akan economic development page, which we will post the link to that in the chat room right now, OKOM, so odede.com, OKOM.html. That's the Akan economic development page. When you go to that page, what you will see is, first you can download the Akan economic development model. You can download that publication. It's a free download, of course. Then you can also download the 4-part series on Akan economic development, where we went into detail examining every aspect of the model and how it applies to various aspects of our lives as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. You can also download, we did a 4-part series on Blog Talk Radio, and we saved those as videos, so you can download all of those 4 videos. We also broadcast the Egua Kodi economic warfare broadcast. Save that as a video. You can check that out, and that one deals with not only the Akan economic development model, but the fact that we recognize that because we are born and raised and we are functioning behind enemy lines, just like our Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestresses and ancestors functioned behind enemy lines during the enslavement era, and they recognized that. And as long as they were engaging in any form of activity, economic, social, spiritual, and so forth, they recognized they were operating behind enemy lines. And they knew that when they exchanged ideas, exchanged information, exchanged strategies and so forth, it was done in the context of recognizing they were behind enemy lines. And we must recognize that as well, including when we spend our money, engage in any form of exchange, we are doing that behind enemy lines. So therefore, every economic activity we engage in is actually a strike against the enemy, a strike against the white offspring, something to be used to liberate us so that we will get beyond operating behind enemy lines and function as an independent, sovereign people on our own land, self-ruling and self-governing. Until we get to that point, every activity we engage in should be designed and should be supporting our movement towards revolution, resolution, ultimately liberation. So we deal with that in that video, and then we also have the video, Kwadefo Ne Amambre, which is dealing with self-employment and ancestral culture. We talk about the nature of self-employment internally and externally. Internally, we deal with the self. We're talking about the Okrawa, the soul, the divine consciousness, the divinity, the force in nature that has been assigned to the head region of every Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit individual, assigned by the Supreme Being to dwell with us and guide us throughout the course of our lives. Our physical brains are the seat or the shrine of that divinity that dwells in our head region, and we are to align with that force in nature in our head region, which leads us towards thoughts, intentions, and actions that are in harmony with divine order and guides us towards the function we are to execute in creation. When we align with that divinity within ourselves, that is self-alignment, and when we align with that divinity, that force shows us what our function in the world is, how to execute that function, and the spiritual capacity we have to fulfill our function. What kind of energy do we have? What configuration of spiritual energy that's unique to us do we have to fulfill our function? And once we attune to that, through aligning with our krawa, our soul, our divine consciousness, then we also attune to the specific energy that we've been given, and therefore we utilize that energy to support our function. That is self-employment, aligning with our divine consciousness and employing our talents, our energy configuration to support our divine function. That's self-employment. And then that extends from the internal to the external. Then we engage the same process externally. We utilize our spiritual capacities and our consciousness to support our divine function in the world. And we engage in activities, economic, political, social, and so forth, that are reflective of that divine function that we are to execute in the world. So we engage in self-employment. And we show how that's connected directly, of course, to ancestral culture. So all of those videos you'll find on the Oklahoma Economic Development page. You'll find the model itself. You can download that and read that model, rooted in ancestral religion. And part of the strategy included in that model is what we call starving the beast and feeding the pride. So that simply means that we make an assessment on a weekly basis to determine what funds we would have previously spent at businesses owned by the whites and their offspring, and then we starve the beast and feed the pride. We take those funds, starve that white beast, and reallocate them to the business, organization, or institution of the week. We are targeting one business, organization, an institution, or an institution per week for 52 weeks. We are in week number 15. We have the various businesses listed on that page as well, so you can go to the page. You can see those various businesses, organizations, and institutions. You can go directly to their websites from the page. You can also go directly to the interviews that we did with those business owners and organization founders and so forth, institution founders. So, and they talk about various, their endeavors, their philosophy behind serving the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit community, and everything that they're doing. So we're targeting one per week. We're on week number 15, and we're targeting one per week for optimal capital infusion. That way, if you starve the beast and feed the pride, if you take the $10 you would have spent at Starbucks over the course of a week, starve that white beast, and reallocate that $10 to the business of the week, feed the pride, then you're taking money that you already generated. You're not a new source of revenue. The money you're already utilizing, and you're simply reallocating, starving the beast and feeding the pride, making a donation to the business of the week, or making a purchase for products and services for the business of the week. Of course, that $10 supports them instead of supporting our enemies. Of course, if 1,000 people did that, then that's $10,000 of capital infusion to one black business in the course of a week. They can therefore expand their business, serve our people, employ our people, serve us at a greater capacity, and so forth. So, of course, if we do not do that by default, we are serving our enemies, the whites and their offspring. So that list of businesses is ever growing. So check out the page, support those businesses. We will be introducing the Business of the Week tomorrow as well. All right. What we want to do now, we already put the Ube and Shang link. I'll put a direct link to that book in the chat room right now. And then we're going to also get to the link for the Fatah Ntem. And you can go to we'll put the direct link to the actual book itself in the page, in the chat room as well. If you're on the phone line, you have a question or a comment, you can hit the number 1. If you're in the chat room, you must log in order to communicate via the chat room. If you don't have a username, you can sign up for one quickly in Blog Talk so you can interact in the chat room. And just give us 1 second. We have to make one adjustment. All right. So before we get started, we're going to take one phone call, and then we're going to get started with the topic for tonight. Okay, Michelle, on the phone line, number 5096. You had a question or a comment?
Yes, Michelle. Good evening, everyone. I was just wondering, yesterday we were talking about the emboldened, and I was wondering that does desecrating of our ancestors' grave or the ancient ancestors' tombs, does it have any kind of consequences on us, weighing on us for the future, or maybe on us today? Because I know much was like sacred. So does that have any bearing?
Now, are you talking about just graves or tombs in general, or just in general?
Yeah, I know. Well, a lot from the tombs were taken, and I always wondered, was that something that might have had some kind of consequences, being right. That it's sacred. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So, and the reason why, and that is true, the desecration of tombs, any burial object, things like that. It's like if you have any possessions in your home, and somebody takes something from you unauthorized, or they destroy your home, or they destroy your car, or anything else, and it's your possession, you feel a certain way about that, and you want to do something to the individual who stole your property or damage your property or whatever, because you have a connection, you have a quote-unquote sentimental attachment to it. So you may get up and come and try to attack them for it. In the same fashion, when you make your transition, and those things that were ritually offered to you as an ancestral spirit through the course of a funerary practice, various processes, various ritual practices, and so forth, the energy of your spirit is connected to the energy of those things that were given via offer. So then if somebody comes and takes them away, you have a magnetic attraction to them, you have a sentimental attachment to them, so to speak, and you would try to move as an ancestral spirit to try to either affect, or assault the individuals who took that, or, the individuals who allowed that to be taken, allowed different things to happen. Like some of our people who get brainwashed and they embrace the whites and their offspring. They allow the whites and their offspring into, sacred areas, sacred temples, for example, on the continent and different parts of the continent. if there's an ancestral grove, for example, you know, in a certain area, a burial grove for the Nsamanfo in different countries across the continent that were normally sacred and only, you know, maybe priests, priestesses, or, you know, family members or people engaged in ritual would be able to go to. And now some of these Negroes will allow crackers to go into a sacred ancestral grove. Then, of course, the spirits will not, you know, possess the whites in their offspring or give them any kind of information or assist them in any kind of way. They repel them, but then they'll also, you know, punish the Afurakani and Afuraitkaitnit people who are guardians of that grove, who allow these perverts to come into, you know, the spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring, to come into our sacred area. So, because they're bringing pollution, and that's repulsive to the Nsamanfo as well as to the Abosom. So yes, you know, there are consequences for that just across the board.
Okay, because I was wondering, was it just a myth? And then looking at when you taught that many of the ancestors in the ancient times had to go through several steps, you know, what is it, the 42 steps of weighing your heart and the things that was very sacred to them. And someone brought up that maybe this is some of the reasons why we are going through things today, you know, that we might have made some mistakes in letting that happen. Because, you know, much was very sacred in those times. So I was just wondering, you know, was it a myth or was it something?
Yes. So, and of course, the number one reason, anytime we reject order and allow ourselves to be, you know, drawn by lust, misguided desire in whatever form, just like physically, if you allow yourself to be drawn by lust or engage in activities that you shouldn't be, then you're going to be, you know, you're going to suffer the effects of those causes. And the same thing with regard to some of our people embracing the whites in their offspring or neglecting, you know, the repulsion of the whites in their offspring, thinking that it was no big deal to allow some of them to come in and utilize them as mercenaries when we were in charge. Some of our people were intelligent enough not to do that because we recognized them as parasites. Some of our people who are, you know, power hungry, maybe they wanted to invade and attack another neighboring group, and they would allow some of the enemies to come in and serve as mercenaries because they saw the whites in their offspring as inferior. They never thought that, well, these inferior individuals could never take over our nation, so we can employ them as mercenaries and, you know, let them join in armies and help us wage war against these neighboring groups. Those who are controlled by lust, misguided desire in that fashion, they didn't recognize that those who are inferior can have an effect upon you if you allow them in. Okay. Just like we mentioned before, grains of salt are not powerful. They're not more intelligent than you. They're not, you know, wielding any kind of extra power. But if you allow those white grains into your system and you keep forcing them into your system, of course your body begins to fight back because they don't belong in your system. But if you keep allowing them to come in, eventually those little weak white grains, those weak white grains that have no power, will end up having power over someone. And they'll develop high blood pressure and swollen ankles and become bedridden and everything else. So those weak little whites, once they are allowed in, will take over. So it's the same thing in our culture. So that's the number one, you know, key, is when we embrace disorder and we allow disorder to enter, then we set ourselves up for self-destructive, you know, consequences. And then, of course, the desecration of graves and things like that are just part of that. That's an expression of that, allowing disorder to come in. But one of course, the 42 declarations of innocence are dealing with not, you know, desecrating graves and so forth.
Okay. And one other question I had was about, do we have rituals, it's called circumambulation or I'm not saying it right, circumambulation rituals. Is there such thing as that? Are
you just talking about circumambulation, talking about going around.
Similar
to, for example, let me see. An example of that would be about the whites and their offspring. For example, in Islam, when they go around the Kaaba and, circle Kaaba 7 times and things like that. So where do they get that kind of thing from? If you look in the Akan tradition, for example, and not only the Akan tradition on the continent, but then also the Akan tradition as it manifests in North America in the form of hoodoo, you'll see that Akan people, during the Akan ritual, spirit possession ritual, where people are drumming and dancing and so forth, and then they dance, we go around in a counterclockwise circle. People are dancing around a circle, a counterclockwise circle. They continue to move around that circle. Then the omfo, a priest or priestess, becomes possessed, or abosomfo becomes possessed by the abosom, and then they, communicate with the people and so forth. And then you'll find in hoodoo here as well, we still dance around in a counterclockwise direction, the same direction, movement of the planet Earth around its axis. And you move around that circle, and people continue to move around that circle, then a possession takes place, and, the abosom of the Nsamanfo communicates with the person. So that's been part of our practice. Moving around in that circle creates, a vortex of energy, and the abosom come down and possess in the midst of that vortex of energy. So, of course, the whites and their offspring saw us doing that. In fact, we mentioned that in our book, Hoodoo People, dealing with the Akan custodians of hoodoo in North America and so forth. We show the actual medut, the hieroglyph, showing that circular movement, and then we talk about, in fact, like in hoodoo, they'll call it the ring shout dance, while dancing around in the ring, moving around in a circular fashion. We show the actual medut that addresses that, the actual determinative medut or hieroglyphic symbol showing that circular pattern and how that's directly connected to, hoodoo, but it's connected to various other traditions as well. Same thing in the Bakongo tradition. You have the Dikinga, the cosmogram, the circular cosmogram, the 4 points of the sun and so forth. It's still that circular pattern. We find the same thing in Vodun and different other symbolism all across the continent, but that comes directly from us. Of course, when they engage in that, they're moving around a circle that has nothing to do, the whites and offspring has nothing to do with any divinities, has nothing to do with anything real. They were just imitating a practice, and then they are addressing nothing, their own deceased, perverted relatives that they're calling deities. So that's all they're doing.
Okay. And one other just quick question. Yesterday we were talking about the different energies that we have. In my case, I always wondered in the daytime I'm more like solemn. I'm not that energetic, but I get kind of energy at night, and I've always been like this ever since I was a child. Is that could be a diet thing, or it's just I can even see better at night? I don't know what that is. That's kind of strange to me.
Well, it depends on the person. It depends on because you'll have influences from your crop on one hand. You also have influences from both on the governors of your patriclan, both on the governors of your matriclan, as well as your Nsamanfo. So the combination of those will determine the kind of, character that you have and, certain things that are expressed through that character. So it just, it depends on, your descent. Depends on you, but it's not odd. It's, that's not unusual.
Okay, because I heard someone say that before that the men in their family, they didn't like getting jobs during the daytime because most of their strength was at night, and it was something that was custom, cultural for them. I don't know. I just thought I'd ask that.
It varies from case to case, but it's not an unusual thing.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Okay. We appreciate the call. Okay. So we want to get into the show. What we're talking about tonight, NETCHEM or ndjem, that is the term in ancient Kamit and Khanit, which means sweet or sweetness, but it also denotes pleasure and pleasurable and things like that. Chem or ntem is called de or dil in Akan, and it means sweet or pleasurable and so forth as well. So it's the same term. Ntem or ndjem, and dim in Akan, same thing. Now, the reason we're focusing on that is because pleasure in the spirit realm. When you understand what the spirit realm is and the nature of the spirit realm and how we function in the spirit realm, is there such thing as pleasure in the spirit realm? Absolutely. However, the key here is that we want to focus on are the implications for warfare. Many of our people, they may not fear death, or some of our people do fear death. They recognize the injustices that we suffer under. They recognize the whites and their offspring are our absolute enemy. They recognize that we must wage war against our absolute enemy. Some of our people fear death because they've been embracing pseudo-religion. But when they overcome that fear because they've rejected pseudo-religion, they've embraced ancestral religion, simply meaning that they begin to communicate with their ancestresses and ancestors, their Nananom Nsamanfo, their spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. When you engage that process and you communicate with them directly, whether through spirit possession, Akan, or spirit communication, ntem, then you have a direct relationship with them. You enter into the spirit realm when you engage ritual processes, so you know the nature of the spirit realm because you interact. So you're no longer, in the dark about that. You know what it is. You know how we function in the spirit realm. So you no longer fear the spirit realm. You recognize the reality of Debra, reincarnation. So you know that you will be reborn through your blood circle. You recognize the reality that when you live in harmony with divine order and the function you are given to execute in creation, that when you do make your transition, you will pass the quote-unquote weighing of the heart against the feathers we talked about last night. And then you will be accepted into Asamando, the ancestral realm, amongst the Nananom Nsamanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, as well as the Nsamanfo Pa, the good ancestresses and ancestors who weren't necessarily highly spiritually cultivated, but were good people nonetheless, and they dwell in that realm of Asamando, the ancestral realm. That's a harmonious place. And when you recognize that reality, and once you make it to the ancestral realm, that you won't be affected by the spirits of disorder because they are not allowed in that aspect of the spirit realm, then death is no longer something that you fear. Even going beyond that, when you function in the ancestral realm, yes, just like here, have pleasure here, we have pleasurable experiences here, we have pleasurable experiences in the ancestral realm. Our feelings are not just something that are connected to our physical body. Your spirit exists, of course, prior to the physical body. We exist as spiritual entities, Nsamanfo, ancestresses and ancestors. Even before that, we were first fashioned by the Supreme Being, living in a spiritual community, just like now. When somebody has a child, yes, you have a sperm and ovum that unite, and a zygote forms and so forth, but there is a sum, a spirit that is drawn from the spirit realm to take up a residence in that physical body. So, of course, the spirit, the sum, precedes the physical body. So we have to talk about the nature of the existence of our Nsamanfo in the spirit realm. There's color in the spirit realm. Color pre-exists the physical world. The physical world is nothing more than a physical manifestation of what is fashioned in the spirit realm. So there's color in the spirit realm. There's gender, of course, in the spirit realm. So for all of these fools, bisexuals, homosexuals, perverts, we're trying to say that there's no gender in the spirit realm, and spirit is genderless. Total nonsense. The Supreme Being, the Great Mother and the Great Father, is Aminet and Amen, or Nyamewa, Nyame if we say in the Akan tradition. the great mother and the great father that is the foundation of gender, the foundation of complementary opposites, the balance of complementary opposites, and everything in creation that's natural proceeds from that complementary balance. So there's gender in the spirit realm, there's color in the spirit realm, there's pleasure in the spirit realm. All of the sensations that we experience in the physical body, that's the spirit operating through the physical body. But when the spirit is operating in the spirit realm, we have those same kind of experiences. One spirit's energy is in connection with another spirit's energy. It can be attractive or it can be repulsive. When you look at magnetism, for example, as we always say, you have two magnets on the table. You can show the same polarity facing one another. And then you'll have, repulsion, an unseen force repelling the other force. If you change the polarity, then you have, and they're opposite, then they'll be drawn together and jump together. They'll be attracted, that magnetism. The same is true of an ancestral spirit. If they're in harmony with one another, then they're attracted to one another. That's a natural draw, natural magnetism. If one is engaging in disorder, just like you come in contact with somebody physically who has a perverse spirit, their energy is repulsive, and you can feel that repulsion, and you will repel them. When you make your transition, one of the Nsamanfo, you will repel negative, discordant spirits who are wayward and controlled by lust and malice. You repel them if you are living in harmony with order or seeking to live in harmony with order on a consistent basis. And, of course, that happens in the spirit realm. So that attraction and repulsion, that is the foundation of pleasure as well as, pain if you're dealing with discordance. So we want to get into that because once people understand that they're the same experiences you have on earth are the same experiences you have in the spirit realm. And when we talk about the nature of those who go to the Sekhet Hetep, as it's called in ancient Kemet, the divine fields of peace, with the Sekhet Aru, the field of offering, and the kind of life that you lead in the spirit realm is a life of pleasure and harmony and order and so forth, something to look forward to, not something to be fearful, but actually to look forward to. That changes the game, because when people know they can experience all kinds of harmony, order, and pleasure in the spirit realm for as long as they are in the spirit realm, and it may be centuries that they're there, 1 century, 2 centuries or more, before they reincarnate, before they come back through their descendants, then they won't fear the spirit realm. In fact, they'll look forward to it, and they will go to it willingly if it is necessary. So that changes their whole operation with regard to warfare. They won't fear striking out against the whites and their offspring when they know only 2 things can happen. Either they're going to execute the enemy, or if they get killed in the process, they will go into the ancestral realm, be embraced by their Nsamanfo, and experience all kinds of pleasure, order, harmony, and balance on every level, including male and female balance and pleasure and so forth, just like male and female interact in a harmonious fashion through sexual activity and reproduction and so forth. Here, the arousal that we are connected with through our, complementary balance, female spirits in the ancestral realm connect, is still that magnetic, harmonious, pleasurable balance as well. So everything that you experience here with regard to pleasure, you can experience there and do experience there as long as you're living in harmony with order. So therefore, the warrioresses who may have been apprehensive about moving against the enemy because they feared or didn't understand what would take place in the ancestral realm, we're going to solve that tonight, and that will open the gate for activity, resolutionary activity. So first what we're going to do is we're going to read from the Uben Shane, because we were talking about fear. We talked about this in one of our other broadcasts as well. That notion of fear causing some people not to move forward in harmony with order. There's a difference between, in our Akan culture, Ehun means fear, but Ohun means knowledge. You transform Ehun, fear, into Ohu, which is knowledge, and the root is Hu, meaning to see or to perceive. to see directly into a thing, to have knowledge of the thing, to understand the thing. And once you do that, you no longer have fear or apprehension. You have knowledge, so you harmonize your thoughts, intentions, and actions with that thing, that entity, that object, in order to execute your function in the world. When you overcome fear, then you can execute every activity you need to execute, including revolutionary, resolutionary activities, eradicating the whites and their offspring, their culture, their pseudo-religions from our spirits and from our world. We're going to go to the specific piece in the Uben Sheng, and it's actually on page 23 in the Uben Sheng, the Ancestral Summon, and it's called Barter, Fear, for Knowledge of Immortality. So we're going to read through that piece, and the way the Uben Sheng was published, we got this information directly from the Nsamanfo. They directed us as to what they wanted us to write about these 20, quote-unquote, essays in the Uben Sheng, what they wanted us to write about, subject would be, what the title would be, and so forth. They're posing questions in a sort of rhetorical context. So these are the words of the Nsamanfo. This is slightly different than the rest of the work that we publish. Of course, the rest of the work we publish, we get guidance from the Nsamanfo, then we go and do the research. We're able to confirm what we were given from the Nsamanfo through actual tangible documentation and so forth. Then we publish that information and convey it, release it to the public, the Afuraitkaitnut public, and then people can study it. Then they can go and check those references and verify that information for themselves. Then they can also go to their Nsamanfo as well as their Kra and verify that information for themselves spiritually as well. This particular text is dealing with the Nsamanfo had specific things they wanted to address, and we simply wrote those things down. So the format, the way it's spoken, is in the voice of the Nsamanfo primarily. So, barter, fear for the knowledge of immortality. Imagine for a moment that Eurasians ceased to treat you in a prejudiced manner. They ceased to commit police brutality. They finally admitted the truth concerning our population, showing that Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut are at least the majority of the population. They began to accept you. The highest political office, as well as the majority of the political offices in the nation, were filled by Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut. Many of their most influential trade and commerce organizations came to be headed by Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut. Usury ceased to be practiced at the expense of Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut owned businesses began to flourish. Equal access to property ownership was honored. Imagine Eurasians removing all of the white images from their places of worship. Imagine such a state of affairs in the nation. How many of you would embrace and feel comfortable in such an egalitarian society? Herein lies your slavery. Many of you who claim to champion Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut, or African cultures really seek only to live this white culture unmolested. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut culture becomes your shield, a system of defense with which you must become moderately well-versed intellectually, for your sense of security against this white culture's blatant attack grows in proportion to your degree of intellectualism. Have you not considered the white culture's subtle attack? Have you not considered the fact that white culture itself is a perpetual attack on your life, lives? To assimilate poison is to accelerate your own death. Whose cultural values do you truly seek to assimilate? Who truly speaks of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut culture? Religion animates the culture. Reincarnation animates the religion. One who speaks of a harmonious society without speaking of reincarnation is one who has never truly desired to burn the tie to the slave master's values, false religion. Have you been made to fear your own culture more than your enslaver? The knowledge of reincarnation is at the root of religion. How one perceives his or her destiny beyond death determines fundamentally how they conduct their lives. We who have been brainwashed into the belief that we only live once have suffered a grave offense. To conceal the knowledge of multiple existences from someone, to take their lives from them. The value of their past experiences, lessons, are disabled as a source of nourishment, cultivation, lacking the proper insight into how future circumstances are crafted in the present, sentences one to repeatedly make misjudgments. How long would you serve under the slave master if you were truly conscious of your immortality? With the knowledge of immortality, reincarnation, and rebirth not diminish the fear of death? Does the Eurasian deliberately execute the barter of fear for such knowledge? Is it not his only true means of maintaining control? Do you endure for fear of death? You are immortal. Ancestral communication consciously connects you to the spirit realm. Immortality of the soul, thus manifesting as reality, no longer speculation. Reincarnation is the process through which you consciously realize and reestablish your connection to divinity. Barter your fear for the knowledge of immortality, if you are of Goddess God. So what we're dealing with here, and what the Nsamanfo are dealing with here, of course, is showing that some of our people who claim to be culturally grounded and so forth, they simply utilize that as a shield. They become moderately well-versed as intellectuals, so that can shield them against the white culture's blatant attack, but they really fear the whites and their offspring. And all they really want to do is live amongst the whites and their offspring unmolested, or to the least degree molested as possible, because they fear the whites and their offspring. Once you overcome that perverse fear, you're not seeking to live amongst the whites and their offspring and in a quote-unquote egalitarian society. You seek only self-governance, self-rule, independence on our own land, and the eradication of the whites and their offspring, not embracing the whites and their offspring. We don't seek to assimilate with cancerous cells, we eradicate cancerous cells. But because people are gripped with fear, they only want to be unmolested. They're like a child who's being beaten by an adult or molested by an adult, and they fear leaving, or grown up, a female being beaten or tortured by a male. All they want to do is continue to live with that male because they fear leaving that individual. They just want to live with that individual with a little bit less torture. And if they torture them a little bit less, then they can breathe a little bit easier, as opposed to waking and wanting to exterminate that individual and removing them from their lives forever so they can live fully and freely. The only thing that allows them to think that it's okay to continue their existence with this individual, if they can just simply figure out a way to live in harmony with this individual with a little bit less molestation, that is fear. So when we break that fear, we wake up fully. Our people's been brainwashed with the fear of death because we don't know, if we're brainwashed, what happens after death. We've been given this false notion of going to hell or going into the heavenly realm, worshiping a fictional white cracker and so forth. And we don't want to make the fictional white cracker mad. So therefore, we don't want to do anything on earth that's going to cause the fictional white cracker to be mad or cause us to go to hell and all this other nonsense. But when we embrace real religion, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, ancestral religion, religion animates the culture, reincarnation animates ancestral religion. The knowledge of rebirth, reincarnation, renewal, and so forth is at the basis of ancestral religion, because we know that we live in the physical world. We have a specific function to execute when we make our transition. We live in the ancestral realm. We execute our function in the ancestral realm, and we will return through that natural cycle. And once you understand that you will return, then that changes totally your concept and your view, and you're given a proper view of how you have to function in the world and how you are to deal with your enemies. You're not going to escape your enemies by just praying and hoping that they're going to stop doing what they're doing, or you're going to receive your reward in heaven because you've turned the other cheek and all that nonsense. You will continue to suffer in the spirit realm if you allow suffering to continue in the physical realm. And then when you reincarnate, you'll end up reincarnating through a blood circle where you end up growing up confronting the same whites and their offspring who are still in control because they have reincarnated. The same slave masters who were torturing us on plantations, they reincarnate through their descendants, and they're living once again, and now they're our quote-unquote supervisors, managers, bosses, and so forth at work, and still engaging in the same discriminatory practices in various forms until we separate from our enemies, eradicate our enemies, and establish our own and defend our own. We will not be free. Once we understand the cycle of rebirth and renewal, that changes our entire process. It changes our entire focus. It realigns our focus to reality. We overcome that fear. We transform fear into okun, which is knowledge, understanding, and insight. So when we talk about okun, knowledge, insight, to peer within, to recognize the reality of what is, we're going to talk about that right now. We're going to talk about what really happens in the ancestral realm, what takes place in the after-death state. We want to talk about the sekhet, hetep, and we find different descriptions of that in ancient Kemet. We're going to talk about the formation of the sekhet, hetep, the divine field of peace that is established by Ra, established by the Creator. When you read the text, the Book of the Cow of Heaven, for the followers of Tuhuti, the force of divine wisdom. So we're going to pull up that text, the Book of the Cow of Heaven, often called the destruction of mankind. And we're going to talk about how that Sekhet was established by Ra. So when you look at the destruction of mankind, the first part of the text is talking about when Ra is ruling on earth. And this deals with important aspects of our cosmology. So the story is laying out cosmology in detail. The first part of that story is talking about when Ra is ruling on earth. And as he was ruling on earth, there was a certain group of men and women who began to engage in disorder. And Ra wanted to destroy these polluted individuals who are promoting disorder in the world. So he takes up counsel with the various abosom, the forces in nature, including his father, Nu. So here you have the creator of the universe. Ra is the creator. Ra'et is the creatress. Nu, or Nun, and Nut, or Nunet, are the mother and father, or father and mother of Ra, and Ra'et, the creator or creatress. And of course, Amin and Aminet are the father and mother of Nun and Nunet. So Ra and Ra'et, the creator and creatress, are grandchildren of the Supreme Being, Aminet and Amin. So that's key, and we did a whole broadcast on that. So Ra takes up counsel with his elders and elderesses, elder divinities and so forth. He takes up counsel because he says, he lays out his case. I want to destroy these corrupted males and females who are out here creating disorder in the world. But before I move forward with that, I want to take counsel with the elders and elderesses who were with me in the spirit realm. I want to take counsel and see what you have to say before I make a decision. And then Ra's father, Nu, confirms his decision, gives his blessing and so forth. And then Ra brings Setchima Sekhmet into being, the lioness, warrioress goddess, divinity Abosom. She's called Abenat and Akan, Setchima and Akan, Sekhmet, Setchima and Kemet. And he directs her to go out, and then she slaughters the disordered men and women. And after she slaughters them, then eventually the men and women who were living in harmony, they came forward with their bows and their weapons, and they asked Ra if they could move forward and assist in that process, and he blessed them, and then they waged war and killed the rest of the disordered men and women, except there was a small remnant of disordered men and women who escaped into the mountain land, a small remnant of them. And of course, that whole cosmology is talking about disordered males and females who are engaging in disorder in the world. We slaughter the vast majority of them, but a small percentage of them, a remnant of worthless ones, as it says in the text, escaped into the mountain land. And of course, those are the ones who escaped into the mountains lands of northern Eurasia, it would become the whites and offspring later on because we didn't exterminate all of them. In fact, just read it quickly from that portion of the text, just so you can get that. And then we're going to get into the second part of the text. So we want to just give us a second, and you can download that if you type in the destruction of mankind, ancient Egypt, destruction of mankind. You can find that text in various translations from the tomb of Akan as well as Seti and so forth. You can find that. I just want to find that one particular line. Hold on one second. And as I'm finding this, so that's the first part of the text. Then the second part of the text, after he has these individuals slain, then he decides Ra's going to stop ruling from the physical world, from Earth. He's going to go into the heavenly realm, and then he's going to establish the Sekhet Hetep, or the divine field of peace. And once he establishes that, he puts Tahuti, the male force of divine wisdom, in charge on Earth, and then he directs him to lead the people on Earth, and those males and females who follow Tahuti, they will have access to the Sekhet Hetep. Now, in fact, let's go straight to that information right away. So after Sekhmet has, destroys the negative men and women and all of that, it says, the majesty Ra set out for the great house, and the deities who were the following of Ra remained with the other men and women who were living in harmony. During that time, the earth was in darkness, and when the earth became light again and the morning had dawned, the men and women came forth with their bows and their weapons. These were the good men and women who saw the slaughtering of the criminal men and women. So when the light dawned, when the morning came again, they came forward in the morning with their bows and their weapons. And they set their arms in motion to shoot the enemies of Ra. Then the majesty of Ra said, your transgressions of violence are placed behind you, for the slaughtering of the enemies is above the slaughter of sacrifice. So after they waged war against the remaining corrupt men and women that Sekhmet did not kill, then Ra blessed them and said, their killing of the enemy is above the slaughter of sacrifice, talking about sacrificing animals for ritual purposes. Killing of the enemy is even beyond that offering of sacred, divine, ritual sacrifice. So he blessed them for killing the enemy. Then next it says, the majesty of the deity says, Kanut, I place myself upon my back in order to stretch myself out. What's the meaning of this? It means that he united himself with Nut. Nut is the great sky goddess, the great sky, Abosom. She's shown stretched over the earth. Yeah, you can see the stars of the sky in the body of Nut, and Ra is going up into the heavenly realm. He says, the majesty of this deity says, I am departing from them, from certain men and women. He must come after me who would see me. Then the majesty of this deity looked forward from his interior and said, gather together men and women for me and make ready for me an abode for a multitude. And his majesty, life, health, and strength be to him, said, let a great field, Sekhet, be produced. Hetep. Therefore, or thereupon, the Sekhet Hetep, the divine field of peace, came into being. And the deity said, I will gather herbs, arak, therein, and thereupon the Sekhet Aru, or the divine field of offerings of divine food, came into being. And the deity said, I will make it to contain as dwellers things like stars of all sorts, and thereupon the stars came into being. So he's laying out the black substance of space and that portion of it with various stars and so forth, the gateway to the ancestral realm. And then the ancestral realm itself. And then go further in the text, he's talking about Nut, he's talking about Shu and so forth, and a certain custom that's taking place. And then we're going to get further to the section when he talks about Tahuti. So then the majesty of the god Ra spoke to Tahuti. First he spoke to saying to get Geb to come forth, and he talked about Geb and certain things that Geb will do. And then, in his absence, Geb is the male force governing the crust of earth and so forth. And of course, Nut is the sky goddess, so the union of Geb and Nut is the union of earth and sky. He talks to Geb, calls him forth, tells him what role he will have once Ra has separated from earth, what role Geb will have. Then he says, call to me the deity Tahuti, the force of divine wisdom. And one brought forth the deity Tahuti in his presence. And the majesty of Ra said to Tahuti, let us depart to a distance from heaven from our place, because I would make light and the divinity of light in the Duat in the land of Cave. Then he says, so he's going up with the Tahuti, departing to a place a distance from heaven in a mountainous region, and he takes the form of Ra Aku, the divine light. Tahuti goes up there with him. He says to Tahuti, you shall write down the things which are in the spirit realm, and you shall punish those who are in it, that is to say, the workers who have worked rebellion or iniquity and so forth. Through you, I will keep away from the servants whom this heart of mine abominates or loathes. You shall be in my place, and you shall forever be called Tahuti, the Asati of Ra, or the one who sits in the seat of Ra. Moreover, I give you the power to send forth, and therefore came into being the Habui bird, the so-called ibis, or the Habui bird of Tahuti. That Achineboa, that animal totem of Tahuti, is called Habui. So when you see Tahuti with the head of the bird Habui, or the so-called crane, the ibis, or sometimes it's the bird itself, representing that force in nature, that is his Achineboa, his animal totem, is called Habui, and therefore he can be called Habui. And you'll see Tahuti, Habui, with the crescent moon on his head. And of course, Habui becomes Habwe or Yahweh and so forth. And we talked about that in the Kukutuntum. This is where Tahuti as Habwe is where they get Yahweh from. They lifted it directly from Tahuti. Of course, Tahuti as Ma'al, Shed, true of voice, true of word, one who speaks the divine law, who represents Ra on earth. He becomes the representative of Ra on earth. As we said, he's called Ma'al, Shed. He goes up on the mountain. Ra takes the form of a divine light. He tells Ma'al Shed that he's going to take his place on earth and be his representative on earth, and tells him to write down what is in the spirit realm. This is Ma'al Shed, or Moshe, going up on the mountain to talk to the God who takes the form of the divine light, a burning bush. That God tells him to write down what is in the spirit realm. So Ma'al Shed comes back from the spirit realm. That meeting with Ra, with the quote-unquote 10 Commandments inscribed on the tablets. That whole story of Moses going up on the mountain to talk to Yahweh and so forth is directly stolen from this text. And we go into detail about that in the Kukutuntum. He takes the form of the divine bird, Habwe. He says, I give you power to lift up your hand before the two companies of the divinity. He also gives him the power to embrace the two heavens with his beauty, his rays of light, because Tahuti is operating through the moon. Therefore, he's connected with the moon divinity, and that moon divinity is called Yah. So the Yah divinity, the moon divinity, of course, is where you get Jah from, or Yah from, the moon divinity, in the corruption, so-called Hebrew corruption and so forth. And then he says, I give you the power to drive back the Hanebu, or the rulers of foreign lands, and the divinity that he gives him, the assistant, the baboon divinity, the so-called dog-headed baboon called Anan, A-N-A-N, Anan. And when you see Tahuti sitting in the sacred boat with the little baboon divinity, you see the Habui bird of Tahuti, the so-called ibis or crane divinity, and then you see the dog-headed baboon, Anan. That's Moshe and Anan. Moshe and Aran, or Moses and Aaron. This is exactly where they stole the story from. Of course, we detail that in the Kukutuntum. So, that whole section, when he talks about, I'm going to set up the Sekhet Hetep, the divine field of peace, set up the Sekhet Aru, the divine field of offerings within the divine field of peace, so that the people who follow Tahuti can be led to that divine field of peace and so forth. That is the ancestral realm. And then once we go to the ancestral realm, if we live in harmony with divine wisdom on earth, we follow Tahuti while we were on earth, as well as the Shat, the female force of divine wisdom on earth, then we have access to the divine field of peace, the ancestral realm. Now, what we want to do next is read a couple of texts dealing with certain aspects of what's in the ancestral realm. If you have a question or a comment on the phone line, of course, you can hit the number 1. If you have a question or comment in the chat room, of course, you have to log in. Now, just want to scroll through real quick in the chat room, make sure we didn't miss anything. Okay, so somebody had a question about the book. Did we have the book in PDF file? If you're talking about, okay, somebody answered that in the chat room. The book of the Cow of Heaven, or the Destruction of Mankind, we actually quote from the text in, for example, our Modern NETCHEM, Divine Law and Divine Hate, we quote from the text in there, but then you can also, if you just Google the Destruction of Mankind, Ancient Egypt, then you'll find various sites that have various translations of that. You can download it, of course, for free. All right. Just want to make sure we didn't miss anything else. In the chat room right quick. Okay. Okay, so we're going to read right now from the Pert Imheru, the Runu Pert Imheru, the so-called Book of Coming Forth by Day. This is known as the Book of the Dead. This is the Shet Ani, or the papyrus of Ani. Ani, of course, is the individual who made his transition, so this particular papyrus was found in his tomb. So, one of the chapters of giving a mouth to Ani, and he's called Al-Sar Ani because he identifies with Al-Sar when he makes his transition. So it says a chapter of giving a mouth to Al-Sar, describe accountant of the divine offerings of the deities, Ani. Ani was a scribe. He was an accountant of the divinities when he was on earth. So when he made his transition, of course, they addressed him in that fashion. So this particular chapter, the title is The Chapter of Giving a Mouth to Al-Sar, the scribe, accountant of divine offerings of all of the divinities, Ani. May he be Malkeru, or true of word, in the spirit realm, or victorious, triumphant in the spirit realm. To be said. So here's the text. I rise out of the edge in the hidden land. May be given to me my mouth. May I speak with it before the great divinity, the master of the spirit realm, talking about Al-Sar. May I not be repulsed, my hand and my arm, by the divine heat of any divinity. I am like Al-Sar, the master of Rastau, or aspect of the spirit realm. Shares Al-Sar, the scribe, Ani Ma'akeru, with that being who is upon the top of the steps. And they show the image of Al-Sar sitting on top of the steps on his throne. And Al-Sar Ani, he's trying to identify and become one with a follower of Al-Sar, because Al-Sar is the male sovereign of the spirit realm, just like Al-Sar is the female sovereign. He sees Al-Sar on the high steps, and he says he shared Al-Sar Ani with that being who is upon the top of the steps. He's in the spirit realm now. I have come at the desire of my heart from the pool of double fire. I have homage to you, master of radiance, at the head of the great house. Within night and darkness, I have come to you. I am an Aku. I am an illuminated one. I am pure. My two hands are behind you. Your portion is with your ancestresses and ancestors. Give to me my mouth that I may speak with it. May I follow my heart at its season of fire and night. So this is an invocation to Al-Sar, the sovereign of the spirit realm. When Ani makes his transition, he is showing I've been pure. I live in harmony with divine order. I've become one of the Aku, the illuminated ancestresses and ancestors of Nananom Nsamanfo. So please allow me to take up residence with you in the Sekhetetep, in the divine field of peace and so forth, as long as I live in the ancestral realm. And then the end of the text says, if this book is known upon earth, this text we just read, because there's the text itself, And then there are instructions within the Pert Imheru describing what the text does ritually. It says, if be known this book upon earth, and it comes into writing upon the coffin, my mouth, he shall come forth by day, Pert Imheru, in the forms of existence, all that he desires, and shall go in his place and not be repelled. Shall be given to him offerings of cake, beer, meat of flesh upon the altar of Alsar. He shall go into the place in peace to set the Sekhet Aru, the divine field of offering, to know command of this, and he can to know the commands of the one in Jejedu, which is Alsar. Shall be given to him wheat and barley in it. Thou shalt be with him green things, all forms of vegetation, foliage, food, and so forth, such as were with him upon earth. He shall perform his desire. The term desire, mer, is also the term love, his desire, like those divinities who are in the spirit realm, in the bond of regularity, millions of times, eternally, describe Ani. So once he shows that he lives in harmony with order, he is given a mouth to speak, and he's asking to give his mouth to speak so he can execute his will in the spirit realm. He becomes a follower of Alsar in the spirit realm. He becomes a part of that ancestral community, and he's giving cakes and beer and meat and all kinds of green food and foliage and so forth, and he exercises his desire, his pleasure for, quote-unquote, het. The het term means eternity. It also means millions of times and so forth. He performs his desire, his love, his desire, just like the divinities do in the underworld, in the spirit realm, in the dua, for eternity, meaning as long as he is in the ancestral realm, he is able to function in that capacity. We're talking about, and just again, when we give food to the Nsamanfo, when we put offerings of cakes and foods and, you know what I'm saying, drinks and everything else and vegetation and so forth on the ancestral shrines when we're here on earth. Why do we give offerings of food? We cook food, and as well as fruits and vegetables, you know, coming from the trees and everything, apples and, you know, everything else. Why do we put food on the shrine for the Nsamanfo? Of course, we physically consume food and it strengthens us. But the spiritual energy animating these objects, because just like you are a spirit that animates your physical body, plant life is living. Of course, there's a spirit in the tree, that's why it lives. And when it dies, the spirit leaves, you know, that physical aspect of the tree, and the tree dies. Other plant life lives and dies. It's like animal life lives and dies. And the same is true of mineral life, lives and dies, and so forth. So the energy that's circulating through the trees, the plants, and everything else, that divine living energy animates that. The fruit, the offerings, and so forth, they have their own energy that's emanating from them, just like the energy emanates from us. So when we put the food out, the physical part of the food we consume, of course, but when we put some food out on the shrine, it is the spiritual energy emanating from those offerings that the Nsamanfo feed upon or are provoked by, the energy emanating from certain fruits and vegetables and roots and everything else. And you give those things whose energy is at the same frequency of the specific abosom or of the Nsamanfo. You wouldn't give food that's taboo to people in your clan because they don't resonate at that frequency. You wouldn't give, you know, food that's not at the same frequency of certain abosoms. So you'll see the first certain abosom, Orisha, Vodou, and so forth, they have certain foods that are sacred to them. Just like they have certain animal life that's sacred to them, meaning that those animals carry the same energetic frequency that the abosom do. So they are animal totems for those abosom. There are certain human beings in the human sphere, of course, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit only. Some of us are fiery individuals because we are connected to fiery abosom. Some of us are watery individuals because we're connected to abosom of water and so forth. Some of us are, you know, earthy kind of individuals who are connected to abosom, connected with mineral life and earth and everything else. So you have abosom that govern certain human beings, of course, certain plant life, mineral life, and animal life. We're all categorized as cells within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. We are categorized by the organ of which we are a component part, and those organs are the divinity. So So when we give offerings of food or plant life or mineral life and so forth that resonates at the frequency of the abosom, so therefore it provokes their energy. The energy emanating from those objects of offering stimulates the energy of the abosom, and then they respond by replenishing our energy. We give offerings of food and so forth to the Nsamanfo, just like you would give your grandmother or grandfather, great-grandmother, great-grandfather a plate of food, strengthen them, to give them energy, to replenish their energy and so forth. When you put food out, it's the electromagnetic energy emanating from the food, as well as the spiritual force in that electromagnetic energy emanating from the offering that they feed upon it, that their energetic body is stimulated by. And therefore, when you provoke their energy with such, an offering, then they respond. We even do that to a certain extent with one another, even before the person consumes the food. If you want a response from someone, if you cook some food that they really like, and then the aroma begins to, float, wafts through the air and so forth, someone who may be downstairs, they pick up on that aroma and it stimulates them. And then they get up and they come and follow and find out where that food is. You have just provoked their energy through energy, the energy emanating from the food. The food is upstairs, the person is downstairs. Through the energy of the food, by putting fire to the food, releasing that aroma, it floats through the air and stimulates within the nostrils of the person and even stimulates physiological processes. You can smell food, and if it's something that, you're drawn to, you can begin to salivate. You haven't touched the food yet, but it provokes a response in your body, a physiological response. You begin to salivate. You begin to develop desire. And that hunger, you want to move forward. There's some food that you don't like. And when you smell that food, you haven't touched it, you haven't eaten it, you haven't gone near it, but the smell of the food starts to make you nauseous. And then some people end up vomiting because of the nausea that develops just from the smell of food. They have been provoked by a food offering, literally. And we, just like we do that with ourselves, that's being provoked by an offering of food, we do the same thing when we put food on the shrine. So, just like the Nsamanfo are stimulated by offerings of food and drink and so forth, because the spiritual energy coming from that stimulates them. They can feed from that. When we give it to them, the same thing happens in the spirit realm. So we're just showing the way it talks about giving cakes and beer and meat and flesh and everything else, and wheat and barley and green things, and he's exercising his desire and all these different things in the spirit realm. He's living in the spirit realm. He's developing and experiencing pleasure in the spirit realm, and not just a one-time thing. It says for het, meaning eternity. Not eternity meaning they will never incarnate, meaning eternity. As long as they are in the spirit realm, they are going to be living as followers of Asar, as well as Aset, the sovereigns of the spirit realm, because they live in harmony. When they're in Asamando, as we call it in the Akan tradition, they will experience that kind of harmony and pleasure and balance for the eternity of their time in the spirit realm. That's key. Because when people who are akofo, warriors and warrioresses, they need to understand that when we wage war against the white star offspring, and if we die in the process, we will move forward and be celebrated by the deity. We will be blessed by Ra and Ra'et. You saw in the text that when the men and women took up their weapons, took up their bows and so forth, and they were going to wage war, and they started shooting at the enemies of Ra, and Ra blessed them, and he even said, even slaughter of sacrifice, sacrificial offerings, sacrificing animals to release that energy, to provoke the energy of the abosom, your slaughter of the enemy is higher than the slaughter of sacrifice. So the creator of the universe directs you and blesses you to kill the enemy. And then he sets up the Sekhet, the divine field of peace, the divine field of offering. So when you make your transition, you can live in perpetuity and harmony and balance and being fed and exercising your desire and your love and your will and experiencing balance for the eternity of the time that you're in the ancestral realm, set up by the creator of the universe because you lived in harmony with what the creator of the universe and the creatress of the universe directed you to do, in harmony with what they directed you to do. So when we go by the divine order, divine law, divine order, the arrangement of the Supreme Being, we follow that order. And we get blessings, or we get propelled into a balanced, harmonious life in the ancestral realm when we follow what Ra and Ra'et direct us to do. When they direct us to exterminate our enemies, then we're blessed for exterminating our enemies in the world, and when we make our transition in perpetuity. So we're going to read from some more of these texts. And by the way, when the whites and their offspring steal this information, so when they're creating that fictional religion, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever it is, when they're creating these fictional religions and they talk about the heavenly realm and hell and so forth, they're getting bits and pieces from these texts from ancient Kemet. And one of the bits and pieces, when they talk about living in harmony and perpetuity and exercising love and desire and so forth in perpetuity for eternity in the ancestral realm, when the white so-called Muslims talk about if you die in the cause of Allah, then you'll be able to have, sex with, many virgins whose virginity is renewed perpetually in the spirit realm. So when they bomb themselves and kill themselves in the cause of their fake deity, Allah, in their minds, they think, well, when I die, hey, I'm either going to live here and kill as many people as I can, but if I die in the process, I don't mind either, because then I'm going to go to heaven, be with Allah, and be able to screw a bunch of virgins perpetually and have desire in the spirit realm. Now, of course, they steal this information, bits and pieces and fragments, and corrupt it from our documents, from our text. Of course, when they make their transition, that, of course, doesn't happen for them at all. They're corrupt, perverse spirits of disorder. They're hanging around, earthbound, full of anxiety and so forth. And then eventually they reincarnate through their perverse white descendants, and they return to the world and bring that same disorder into the world that they brought in a previous lifetime. But they believe falsely that they're going to have a wonderful life in the afterlife. So they are unhindered with regard to cutting people down. When you look at the Charlie Hebdo case and so forth in Europe, when they drew cartoons of the fictional cartoon character Muhammad, the cracker Arabs and so forth, and of course all of this, the promotion of it is all Hollywood, but the optics of it is that the so-called Arabs decided, all right, well, when you do that, we're going to get strapped up. We're not going to march. We're not going to protest. We're not going to do any of that. What we're going to do is we're going to go get strapped up, go into those offices, and execute these individuals. And if we die in the cause, then we're going to go to the so-called heavenly realms and have eternal pleasure anyway. So either way, we're going to have pleasure. We're going to have pleasure cutting you down, or we're going to have pleasure going into, their fake heaven. So they don't mind that. They steal these things from our concepts, but then at the same time, they tell us, turn the other cheek, you shouldn't be going against, your enemies, you shouldn't have hatred in your heart and all this other nonsense. But we have the real information. We actually deal with the Nsamanfo. We actually communicate with the Nsamanfo. We communicate with the Aboson. When you communicate with the Nsamanfo on a regular basis directly, then you have knowledge, direct experiential knowledge of Asamando, the ancestral realm, because you enter into the ancestral realm. Some people enter that state during the dream state. Some people enter that state during the ritual state, and so forth. But either way, you have direct experiential knowledge of the ancestral realm. When you have that kind of knowledge, then you no longer have any fear. That fear is transformed into Ohun knowledge, real perception. And when you no longer have fear, then you act according to your divine function. And when Ra and Ra'et, the creator and creatress, communicating with you, stimulates your Ba, your divine living energy, or your Ba'et, to get up and execute and cut down your enemy, you have no fear at all. And no cracker can stop that process. No cracker can determine when Ra or Ra'et is going to direct one of their children to get up on that specific day and execute their enemies, execute these criminals who are gunning our people down on a daily basis. No cracker can stop that. So the best thing that they try to do is keep us away from ancestral religion, because when you embrace ancestral religion, you embrace the supreme being. You embrace the creator and creatress, Ra and Ra'at. You embrace your own Kra, your Prawa, your soul, your divine consciousness. And you are led in your thoughts, intentions, and actions by the supreme being through the agency of your Kra, and you're powered by Ra and Ra'at to move, operate. You don't follow the laws laid down by the whites and offspring designed to restrain you and make you acquiesce to being murdered and slaughtered. You follow the law of the supreme being. When Ra and Ra'at direct you to move, then you move. When they direct you to execute your enemies, our enemies, then you execute our enemies. And nobody can tell you and step in between Ra and Ra'at and their communication to you. That's the danger of us embracing our ancestral religion. Because unlike the Hollywood Charlie Hebdo nonsense, you'll find the more Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people begin to embrace their ancestry and be led by their own Nsamanfo internally, without direction from people outside. Whites and offspring try to infiltrate organizations and things like that, but they cannot infiltrate the relationship you have with your Nsamanfo. They can't step in between that and speak for your Nsamanfo. They can't step in between the communication of Ra and Ra'at directly to your spirit. They have no capacity to do so. And because they have no capacity to do so, the best thing they can do is make you scared to embrace ancestral religion, period, because they know when you embrace it, they can't infiltrate. And when they can't infiltrate, your communication is coming directly from your own Nsamanfo, directly from the Aboson, and you move according to that direction and that direction only. And then you begin to see many, many more of these criminal, murderous cops and others being exterminated by Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. The rise of ancestral religion is the rise of the extermination of our enemies. That cannot be stopped. So let's look at another text. And there's a few of them in Heru. So we lost the place of one of them, so we want to pull that back up. So just give us a second real quick. We want to find that again. And in the meantime, individuals, if you have a question or a comment for us, it's the number 1 on the phone line. Okay, and I see some comments here in the chat room, so let me scroll down real quick and make sure we didn't have any questions in the chat room. I see some comments. I just want to make sure there weren't any questions. Okay, so there was one question. Is the Ancestral Summons a silent meditation? So who's been saying the Ancestral Summons is the book. That was the first thing we were reading from, one of our books, one of our 16 books that we published. So when you read through that, you'll see, as you read through it, you'll understand the way the information is written is coming directly from the Nsamanfo. And then we have a 2-part video series on the same page, on the Ubin page on our website, where we go through the entire book from beginning to end and clarify the various concepts that you find and what the Nsamanfo was saying. So it gives you a foundation of dealing with the ritual practices of ancestral religion and the nature and function of these practices. Any ritual practice we engage in, we're engaged in the process of receiving, processing, and transmitting energy at a measurable rate, in a measurable fashion, in a quantifiable fashion. We do not engage in ritual practice that is simply symbolic. If we're giving offerings, we just talked about giving offerings, releasing that energy in a measured fashion to provoke the energy of the Aboson so they can replenish our energy, to provoke the energy of the Nsamanfo so that they can be fed and they can communicate with us as well. We're receiving, processing, and transmitting energy in a measurable, quantifiable fashion in every ritual we engage in, whether it's ritual song, ritual dance, ritual prayer, ritual incantations, ritual balance, food offering, libation, spirit possession, spirit communication, nature worship, talismans, amulets, idols, all these various things, shrine work, everything has a function. So that's what Ubin Shane is dealing with. And once you have that foundation, once you begin to move into ritual practice, you understand the functionality of ritual practice. So that's the foundation of that particular text. Okay, and I think I saw one more question in the chat room. Okay, looks like that was not a question. Okay, somebody said, okay, just give me 1 second, because sometimes the chat room and Blog Talk jumps past certain pieces. Okay, how do we properly dispose of food offerings, and how long should they be left out? Typically, the food offerings, you can leave the food off, depending on what kind of food offering it is, whether it's cooked food or if it's fruit and things like that. You can leave some cooked food out for a number of hours, and sometimes until the next day, and then people, you can take it out. Food offerings, it can be a day or more, but it's really determined, of course, it's determined by your Nsamanfo, and as you continuously go to the Nkomre, the shrine, you're developing a relationship with your Nsamanfo. So it's not a situation where sometimes we're taught by certain individuals, so they're in the Akan tradition, Yoruba tradition, and so forth, they'll talk about, giving offering, and they'll go to the shrine and full libation, or they're doing invocation or an evocation, some kind of song or something like that. They'll pray and do different, do some invocatory prayer, and then they'll give an offering, and then that'll be it, and that'll be their, ritual practice. But you don't call or invoke the abosom, or call and evoke the Nsamanfo, and then give them some food, and then just leave. You're evoking them or calling them forward so that you can learn something. So it's just like physically, when you call your Nsamanfo or call your relatives over to your house, first you call them. If you get on the phone and call them, that's the call. When we pour libation, that's the call. We engage in ritual prayer, that's the call. When the people come forward, you give them food. When they sit down and eat the food, and you're nourishing them and so forth. And after they eat the food and everybody's relaxed, then you sit down and listen. You ask them questions, and they give you answers, and they nourish you. So the call, the ritual invocation or evocation, and then the giving of offering, that is a provocation of their energy to bring them forward from the spirit realm to come closer to you, and you coming closer to them. And then giving them some offerings is to stimulate and provoke their energy, so that energy they can provoke you as well. And once you do that, then you sit down in front of the Nkomre, the shrine, and ask the questions that you need to ask to learn about any aspect of the culture. Ask about shrine work. Ask about offerings. Ask about how long they want the offerings up, or when you should take them up, and so forth. Ask about the nature of your relationship with them. You ask about the nature of the relationship with the Abosom. You learn that directly from them. Now, you can get that information from people who publish things and talk about things and everything else, but that's just going to give you some clarification. But the key is the central institution of learning in ancestral religion is your own ancestral shrine, your Nkomre, and you're communicating with your direct blood ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated in your own blood circle. So very often it could be a day or more, depending on how they feel. So when you go and you sit before them and you give food and you communicate with them and so forth, you'll notice, when it's time for you to get up and end that communication, that session, that dialogue with them. Because if you try to get up too early, you'll feel a very negative energy, meaning you need to sit back down because they're not finished communicating with you yet. You're not excused from the quote-unquote table yet of your elders and eldresses. But then when it's time, then you'll feel, that energy that's light enough for you to relax and end that session. The same thing with the giving of food. You'll be in the store, for example, and because on one hand, in North America, some of us had lost our ancestral religious traditions and are reincorporating them. So we may not know the specific food offering for every specific abosom or for the Nsamanfo and so forth, whereas on the continent, certain individuals and certain groups still have a knowledge of that catalog of which foods are connected to which abosome and so forth. So they just memorize that and they remember that and they do that. And if somebody gave some wrong food, they'll say, oh, well, no, you don't give that food to this abosome. Actually, it's this food that's given to the abosome because they remembered it, they memorized it, and they continue to share that information. Us over here, if we don't have that information because we've lost that catalog of information, we can simply learn directly from the Nsamanfo what foods they want. So if you're in the store and you're going into the produce section, they will direct you as to what foods to take so that you can place that on the shrine. If you get the wrong thing, you'll feel a very negative pull away from that. And if it's something that you need to grab, you'll feel an attraction towards that. And the more you communicate with them, the more you work with them, the more that communication will be strong, it will be powerful. And you will know clearly when they are communicating through clairvoyance, through clairaudience, through clairsentience, through, clairgustance and everything else, the various spiritual senses that we have, the 7 spiritual senses that we've talked about in different broadcasts and so forth, and it's in our documents. They will communicate with you directly where you know for sure, for certain, okay, this food they want and this food they do not want. This food is in harmony with their energy, this food is not. And then later on, when you have engaged that process, you'll find out later when you're picking up some literature, you come in contact with other people, if they put you in the pathway to come in contact with certain people, the people say, oh, in the Akan culture, we give this kind of food to the Nsamanfo on this particular day. And then you'll find, wait a minute, they directed me to do that. The past few months, I've been doing what is actually done on the continent because, of course, we have the same Nsamanfo. So it'll simply confirm for you what you've been doing. So very often it's a day or more, sometimes a couple of days that you leave the food out, but it's determined by your own Nsamanfo. You can take food and you can dispose of it because the energy of the food is what they feed on, and they've already taken that. The physical body of the food, it's already used up. It's already done. They took the energy that was emanating from the food, similar to the aroma, but the energy within the electromagnetic emanation, the energy inside of that is what they are provoked by and what they utilize. So that's already taken out. So by the time you go and, get the food to remove it from the shrine, it's already utilized. It's no longer, quote unquote, sacred food. It's already been used. So you can dispose of it, whether you dispose of it outside in earth or you throw it out. You ask Nsamanfo if it's okay to remove that. If it is, then you dispose of it. So we want to scroll up and make sure we didn't miss anything else. All right. It looks like we conversation going on in the chat room. I just want to make sure we don't have any questions here. And by the way, it's like about 20 minutes left in the broadcast as far as online. We may not have to go into overtime too much, but if we do, if you want to listen beyond 11 o'clock, then you must call in on the phone line before 11 o'clock, because once 11 o'clock hits, if you're just listening online, then it will cut off and you won't be able to hear any longer. But the people who are on the phone by 11 o'clock, then you'll be able to hear beyond 11 o'clock. So the call-in number is 657-383-0635, 657-383-0635. And there's about 20 minutes left as far as for you to be able to call in and get on the phone line. All right, so we just want to make sure we didn't miss anything else. Chat room. And, of course, if you have any questions or comments, you can hit the number 1 on the phone line so we can see that your hand is raised. Okay. And just give us a second while we look through this particular text. We're getting back to this text. And there are numerous texts where they're talking about these different things. I just want to find a couple of them just so you can get a sense of what we're dealing with when we're talking about the ancestral realm. If you look in for example, the Kurt Emiru, the so-called Book of the Dead, as you find For example, the Budget version, the only reason we would recommend you can download that because they have a line of the Medusa themselves, the hieroglyphs themselves. Then under that is the transliteration, and then under that is the translation. So that way you can see not only the actual, as opposed to somebody just translating the text, and then you can't make a one-to-one correspondence between the English letters and so forth and the Medusa. You don't know what they made a mistake with and what they didn't make a mistake with. You don't know what, at least with that kind of, those three lines, the Medusa, the transliteration, translation, then you can see the symbols, see the terms, and see the words, and you can see where they have made mistakes as well. Because when you study the languages of Afuraitkaitnut, we have these same words in our languages with the same meaning intact. So you look in the Akan language, look in the Yoruba language, look in the various languages, look in a hieroglyphic dictionary, you will find the same words with the same meaning, same names of deities and so forth. So you can correct these things. Okay. All right, so here's another text, for example, a chapter of going to the divine chiefs of Alsar. Gives you some more context of dealing with life in the ancestral realm. So you can understand what's going on in the ancestral realm. Transforming ehu, fear, to oku, knowledge, which is rooted in hu, perception of what is real. It's called Chapter of Going to the Divine Chiefs of Alsar. So this is what the scribe Ani Ma'akeru says. Has built for me my Ba, my divine living energy, a dwelling place in Jedjedu, which is a city in ancient Kemet, but it's also a region of the ancestral realm. I have become vigorous in Te, which is also a region of the ancestral realm. I have plowed the field in my forms of existence. Is my palm tree as the divinity Amsu over them. My abomination, not do I consume. Anything that was, negative within me, I do not consume that or hold on to that. I reject that. I purify myself. I detoxify myself. My abominations, those which I abominate, are filth. Not do I consume it. There are food offerings and meat for those who are not destroyed by it. Not do I raise myself to it with my two arms. Not do I walk thereupon with my sandals, because my bread is of grain, the white grain. My beer is the red grain of hapi. So they're talking about bread and beer, and there's a difference between the henket, so-called beer, kind of like palm wine in ancient Kemet, as opposed to, Budweiser or something like that here. So they're talking about the grain, the white grain, and the red grains of henket, or so-called beer, kind of palm wine sort of, that he had, red of hapi, coming from the river Hapi. Indeed, the Sektet boat and the Ated boat bring to me them, and I eat them under the trees. I know the branches that are beautiful. So he's sitting down, he's eating, he's drinking, he's in ancestral realm. The divine boat of Ra and Atem and so forth are going back and forth, and he's living in a harmonious state in the ancestral realm, filling himself with produce and drinks, food and drink and everything else. How I make myself an aku, glorious, with the white crown there. I lift up the aurat, which is the serpents on the crown. Hail, guardian of the door, who gives peace to the world. Bring to me those who make offering. Grant you that I may lift the earth, that I may be open to me the beings of splendor, their arms, that they may speak the cycle of the divinity, the words of the Hamimet with Alsar Ani. May lead him the Hapti of the divinity, the heart complex of the divinity. May they make him powerful in the heavenly realm among the divinities who have visible form. Now, every god and every goddess that he passes are for making Ani Ma'akeru, or triumphant, at the beginning of the cycle, living upon heart, eating them at the coming forth from the east. Judged is he by the ancestors of Ra. Judged is he by the ancestors of light, ancestresses and ancestors of light. He is an aku, meaning an illuminated one and spiritually cultivated ancestor or ancestor, also called a shining one, so to speak, aku. clothed in the heavenly realm amongst the Uru, the mighty ones, talking about the divinities. Of course, the Uru becomes the Ulu and Ului, and Uluim and Elohim, a corruption of the term Uru in ancient Kemet, the mighty ones, a title of the divinity. The provisions of Alsar, the scribe Ani, this particular scribe who made his transition, the provisions of Ani are among the cake and the henket, the beer made for your mouth. I go in through the Aten, the sun. I come out through the divinity Akwi or Yahweh, which is the moon divinity. The moon is called Yah. It's also called Yahweh, Yahweh, the moon divinity. I go in through the sun disk. I come out through the Yahweh, meaning the moon divinity. Of course, again, Yah is Jah, and this is where they get that terminology from. Amongst the whites and their offspring, it's totally stolen from the title of the moon divinity itself is Yah or Yahu or Yahweh. And then you also have the title of the sun itself is the Aten. Ra is the creator and creatress, and they operate through the Aten, operate through the sun. Ra is not the sun is Aten, Ra, and Ra operates through the sun. The moon divinity itself is Yah or Yahu, it's also called Yahweh. And then Tuhuti, as well as other divinities, can utilize the moon as a transmitter of his divine energy. There are female forces operating through the moon as well. So he says, I come in through the sun, through the disk, and I come out through the moon, through the Yahweh, the divinity Yahweh. I speak with the followers of the divinity, speak with the Aten, the divinity, the disk. I speak with the Hamimet, a class of ancestral spirits. He grants me to be victorious in the darkness of night, within Mehort, near his forehead, talking about the forehead of Ra, the serpent on the forehead of Ra. Behold, I am with Alsar. I proclaim what he announces amongst the mighty ones, the Uru, the divinity. He speaks to me the words of men. I listen and repeat to him the words of the divinity. I come, Ani, triumphant in peace, as one who is endowed with all things. I am a shining being, or an Aku, endowed more than all of the other shining beings. But what he's done is he's become powerful, just like one of the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. The term Aper, he's become Aper, endowed or fully ornamented. More than the other, the Aper, this is where they get the term Aper or Eber. The whole Hebrew nonsense is coming from this term. And we dealt with that partially in a previous broadcast, and we're going to bring that up in some future broadcasts. So again, it's talking about receiving cakes and beer and eating and drinking and living in harmony with order and being protected by the great ones, the divinities, living in harmony in the spirit realm in perpetuity. And there was one more specific text that we wanted to get to. Just give us a second real quick. And as we're pulling that up, we'll also the chat room. Okay, and there's 11 minutes left in the broadcast. And, okay, I made out for posting that information in the chat room. And what we're posting in the chat room, for those on the phone line, a couple of things. We do have a separate social media network outside of Facebook. Of course, we are on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and so forth, and YouTube and all of that. But we also have our own separate social media network, Afuraitkaitnut.ning.com. When you go to that network, you can join it. You can create a profile, and when you go there, we post blogs, and people post discussions, and people post their own blogs and photos and videos and everything else. Same kind of information in here as well as in various parts of the world. Our people, of course, only, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people only, and so forth. And you can join that network, and therefore, we always update in that network. We always post anything that's coming up, all the broadcasts, any new books that are being published, any new articles, any events that we're having. If we're doing a presentation in different cities or whatever, we post that information there. Any kind of update, we automatically post there first, any blogs or anything else. so you can join that network. We also, of course, we are Afuraitkaitnit is the direct link on Facebook. Kwesi Akan on Facebook. Previously, the username was Afuraitkaitnut. They're making people just no longer use any kind of username, but they're having people use their first and last name. So you'll probably have noticed on Facebook that people who had Afurakani names, Afuraitkaitnit names on Facebook, all of a sudden now they have English names on Facebook because they're forcing people to use their quote-unquote legal name. So we were Afuraitkaitnut on Facebook. Our legal name, of course, is Kwesi Ra Nehem Pata Akan, because we, of course, went through that process. We didn't just, reclaim our ancestral name and just use it amongst, people who, understand the culture. We went through the process so we could, fully utilize the name on the Social Security cards, birth certificates, bank accounts, and driver's licenses, and everything else. So our full legal name is Kwesi Ra Nehem Pata Akan, and our title is ODWIRA. So that's a title, that's a functional title. So you'll see me as Kwesi Akan on Facebook, and you can connect on Facebook. We are ODWIRA on Twitter, ODWIRA on Instagram, ODWIRA on YouTube, and please follow us on YouTube, for example. Subscribe to us so you'll get that information. And you can also click on the follow button on the Blog Talk channel. When you click on that follow button on our Blog Talk page, then you'll automatically be on the mailing list. So anytime there's a new broadcast coming up or any development, we automatically send that email out to everybody, and you'll be on that list, so you'll get that notification all at the same time. We also have, also mentioned in the chat room, we have a Gofundme page. We are working to establish a physical space in the D.C., Maryland area for our institution. Our institution is called Akongwasuya. We established that institution in Chicago. We're from Chicago. We've only been in D.C. for the past 6 years. All the books and publications and trainings, including the Sanko Bajuma training with behavioral health, Akuma Sa, addressing substance abuse abstinence through ancestral religion, Akuma Dain, overcoming domestic abuse through ancestral religion, Akuma Tra, overcoming intergenerational transformational trauma through ancestral religion and so forth, Odede Afurakani manhood, these various workshops that we provide for free, all the books that we publish and articles we publish in the broadcast and so forth. Everything that we do is born of our institution. We're looking to reestablish a physical space for our institution, Akongwasuya, and that space will be called Akongwasuya Dain, Dain meaning a sanctuary or space in the D.C., Maryland area. That way we'll have all of our classes there, all of our trainings there, all of our presentations there, all of our ritual observances, including our 7-day New Year celebration in September, as well as the Apo celebration, and a Kwesi Adai and a Wuku Adai and so forth. Have that there. We will also have the publishing arm there in the institution. We publish our books. We have 16 books out now, and we publish in-house on our own printers in color. So we don't contract that out. We do that ourselves. We do that out of our residence now. We'll have those printers and everything in the space as well, and therefore there will be employment opportunities for Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the community, in the publishing arm, for printing and cutting and shipping and everything else, having people participate in that process and be employed in that process. We also have the Entrepreneurship Program that is already ongoing. And we'll have not only the broadcast at the center, but expanding our class offerings so people can participate, actually come physically to classes at the center, as well as live streaming them for individuals who are not in this area. We'll be able to expand our class offerings throughout the course of the week. And we also have our Entrepreneurship Distributor Program, which is already in effect. Individuals who would like to employ themselves immediately. You can employ yourself immediately by becoming a distributor of our softcover books. You'll be working for yourself. You won't be working for us. You're simply independent entrepreneur purchasing our books wholesale from us and selling them retail in your area. The wholesale discount is 30% off. So we have some people who are already distributing. When you go to the Nhoma page, the publications page on our website, you will be able to see the video for that, as well as the distributor information document with all of the wholesale and retail prices, and you can start that process immediately. We sent out an email recently to some individuals who wanted to begin to sell the books right away, but they wanted to do it on consignment because they are unemployed. They don't have the funds to purchase the books wholesale up front. Our minimum order for a distributor is 10 books. So, for example, the books that are $10, like Afuraitkaitnut, the origin of the term Africa, 10 copies of that, retail, they're $10, so that'll be $100, but it's $70 wholesale, and you purchase them for $70, you sell them, $7 each, and sell them for $10 each, and you make $30 if you sell 10 books. Some people didn't have the $70 for the first set of 10 books or more because they're unemployed and they want to know if they could do this on consignment. And we ship the books out to them first, and then they sell them and pay us back and then start the process that way. Typically, we print on demand, so we don't, to save, it's more cost effective to print on demand. So when people make orders, we print them and then we send them out. That way we don't print up a bunch of books, have an inventory, and if people don't order those specific books and they order other books, then we just have books sitting, and we could have used those funds to cover other expenses. So we typically print on demand, so we weren't in the position to be able to send out books on consignment. However, our two-pronged strategy to accommodate those individuals is if you share our information, the publications page on your various social media websites, as people begin to order, more people become aware of our publications and they order them. The more orders we receive, we can, we print on demand, we send those out, but then we will also have the funds to print out a few extra copies of books, and then we can send those out to individuals who are interested in being distributors but can't afford to, purchase the book and need them on consignment up front. So the more you get this information out, the more people become attuned to the work, the more opportunity we have to print out additional copies, and we can send those out with no cost to you up front, and then you can sell them and compensate us on the back end. And the same with individuals who are not necessarily interested in being distributors. You just like the work and you support the work we're doing. If you make any purchase of any one or more of our books, that assists us not only in covering our own expenses, but also to assist individuals who want to distribute this work and get this work out to our people. Again, there's about a minute left in the broadcast as far as online. If you want to listen past 11 o'clock, you have a minute to call in, 657-383-0635, 657-383-0635. You have about a minute to call in to get on the phone line before it cuts off online. So again, any purchase that's made, or just sharing the information, or any purchase that's made that assists us in order, not only to fulfill your order, if there are certain books that you've been reading online, because of course all 16 of our books are free ebook downloads, but then we also, so for people who don't have the funds but they need to get this information, you can download all of our books for free. But if you would like the soft cover versions, we sell them, they range between $8 and $11. So if there were books that you've seen that you like, that you'd like to have the soft cover version of, and you make a purchase that would assist us in, getting these other books out to people who would like to distribute. The more people who are distributing, the more the information gets out, but it's also a way to employ our people immediately. We need to have institutions where our people can go and say, I need employment right now. Can you assist? And we can assist in that process. And this is what we have. So, and the books, once people actually get them, the books sell themselves. So it empowers the community because they get information about natural health and ancestral religion and culture. They can reorient their lives, overcome addictions and various things, and restore balance to themselves and to their families and children and so forth. So we're empowering the community with this information, realigning people. At the same time, the people who become distributors, they are empowering themselves and their families financially because they can actually employ themselves, and they're not dependent on the work history they have with the whites in their offspring. They're dependent on the whites in their offspring for work. They can work while serving the community in a positive capacity. And we need to be able to, we need to have those kinds of tangible programs any organization that's serving the Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit community should have some similar option where our people can, through connection with your organization, they can employ themselves, or they have some option, some channel whereby they can empower themselves while they're empowering the community at the same time. So again, the support of the community is critical. So any book published or any donation that you make, if you make any donation of $15 or more, we will send you one or more of our books anyway. Let us know which book or books you would like. You make a recurrent donation on the PayPal button, and all of this is on the publications page, the home page on our website. You get at least one book per month. We have 16 books. So a recurrent donation, for example, of $15 per month, you pick that recurrent donation option for at least the next 16 months. You receive a book in the mail for the next 16 months. By then, of course, we have other books that we are working on publishing, which will be out soon. So we appreciate putting that information out. We also have a Gofundme page, and you see that on the website as well, to fund the establishment of our center. We're at almost 10% of our fundraising goal right now. So when you see that, get out there to the individuals who have made donations through the GoFundMe page. And again, with the GoFundMe page, any donation of $15 or more, you will receive one or more of our books in return for your donation. So it's not even just a free donation. Just let us know which one or more of the books you would like for your donation, and we will send that out to you. The GoFundMe page, you go to GoFundMe, Akan, but even before that, just go to the regular odede.com website, and you'll see the GoFundMe link there as well. Okay, so I see some more comments in the chat room. I just want to scroll up and make sure I see a number of comments, and I want to make sure we didn't miss anything. All right, so some of these are conversations. All right. Just give me one more second. Just want to go through this information real quick. Okay, it looks like those were just comments or discussions. Somebody asked about it looks like somebody was asking and it got cut off about seance and so forth. So when they talk about a seance, they're just talking about communicating with spirit. White and Arrow Springs started in the late 19th century, so-called 19th century. They started dealing with, quote-unquote, spiritism and different things. So you have the theosophical societies and pseudo-occult societies, typically by the White and Arrow Springs, founded in dissexuality, homosexuality, and their perversity, breaking away from traditional Christianity and other forms of pseudo-religion and creating a different form of the same pseudo-religions and just calling it something else, calling it spiritism, communicating with spirits, calling it, hermeticism or, the Golden Dawn and all of this other nonsense, pseudo-esoteric nonsense, misinformation. So what they're doing when they're communicating with, engaging spiritism or seances, they're communicating with their own deceased criminal white relatives. They're not communicating with any elementals. They're not communicating with any, higher level adepts. They're not communicating with any higher level beings or mythological extraterrestrials and all that nonsense. They're communicating with their dead relatives and passing them off as enlightened, elevated, avatars and all kinds of criminality. But it's the same criminal white drunkard, cracker, deceased slave master who died that they're communicating with and passing them off as such. So sometimes our people will take on these, titles and utilize the same nomenclature for the things that we're doing, but we're doing is separate and distinct from what the whites and offspring are doing. Give me 1 second. I have to make one adjustment. So that's what's going on when you hear people talking about seances, and then you find that, for example, some people in the practice of the Yoruba tradition in Juju and Voodoo and as well as Hoodoo. Juju is the Yoruba tradition in North America, and Voodoo is the Fon and Ebe tradition. Hoodoo is the Akan tradition in North America. Sometimes what happens when traditions become corrupted, people started incorporating different aspects of Catholicism or Protestant Christianity and using the Bible, using Psalms and all this nonsense, incorporating that garbage, that perversity into our practice because we have become brainwashed. And Kardecian spiritism and Allan Kardec and all that nonsense people started incorporating into Lukumi and things like that. When we embrace our traditions harmoniously, then we get rid of all of that. We eradicate any white influences from our ancestral religious practices. We get back specifically and only dealing with the actual Abosom, the actual Nsamanfo, and we deal with them in a pure fashion. So when we talk about Ojida, purification on, Benada Tuesday, we're talking about Ojida purification operationalizes Nananom, operationalizes Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, ancestral religion. So we purify these things. So you're not. It's not a notion of these things held us over and preserved our tradition. In reality, they did not preserve our tradition. The whites in our offspring will make us believe, some of these white writers and other brainwashed Negroes make us believe that we maintained our traditions by hiding them in Christianity. In reality, the Abosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, the Loa, and so forth, directed us to not utilize white perverse culture to incorporate our ancestral religion into. They directed us to reject that. And those who rejected that, for example, in Haiti, are the ones who waged war against the whites in our offspring and destroyed the whites in our offspring. The ones who began to incorporate Catholicism and white images and all of this foolishness, they're the ones who are still perpetuating ignorance and self-destructive activity in Haiti today. The ones who went along with the Abosom, with the Loa, the Orisha, and so forth, the Vodou, they're the ones who liberate the people. So, again, you see that poison. You can see the same thing in the Yoruba tradition. For example, in Cuba with Lukumi, you have some people incorporating white saints and so forth, some people who do not. You have some people in Hoodoo who incorporate, the Psalms and other things from the Bible and other nonsense and pseudo-Native American garbage and European pseudo-garbage, pseudo-spiritual garbage. The ones who are focused, they reject all of that cancerous, tumorous type information and influence from our practice. And those are the ones who are restoring ancestral religious practice in their families and awakening our people. So this is what we're doing. We're talking about purification. All right. All right, we see some more comments in the chat room. I'm going to go through that real quick. Make sure we didn't miss anything. All right, so actually, I did find that other text, but it was basically a similar text to the ones that we have written. So when you read the Runu Pert and Meru, the book of Coming Forth by Day, there are different texts talking about the various forms of life and aspects of life in the ancestral realm, talking about food and drink, sexual activity, pleasure, NETCHEM in the ancestral realm. So the key here is, again, understanding the nature of disembodied communication, understanding the nature of the relationship we have with the Nsamanfo, understanding that there is no fear of death, because we understand when we move through the gateway of death, we go directly to the Nsamanfo that we have been communicating with throughout the course of our lives, into the realm of Nsamanfo, Asamando, the ancestral realm. We have no fear of that. We have no fear of what's going to take place because we know what's going to take place. So therefore, when we wage war against our enemies, we are emboldened. We have no fear, no hindrance, no apprehension. We will experience pleasure on a higher level in the ancestral realm than we do even here. because here we do have the influence at some point in some areas of our enemies. When you're in Asamando amongst the Nananom Nsamanfo, you do not have the influence of the spirits of disorder because they are repelled from that aspect of the spirit realm. They cannot approach and enter into the region of the Nananom Nsamanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. So that life, living in that kind of quote-unquote village, in that aspect of the ancestral realm with your blood relatives, your great-great-grandmothers and great-great-grandfathers who made their transition, uncles, aunts, and so forth, who lived in harmony with order, you live amongst them. Of course, in the Akan tradition, we say that if you want to know what Asamando is like, consider the Adai or the dream state. When you lay down and go to sleep at night, your body is laying flat in the dark, no movement, no sound, no light, but then you are having experiences. Your spirit sometimes separating from the body and communicating with other Asunsum, other spirits, sometimes ancestral spirits, direct blood relatives, sometimes non-relatives in the ancestral realm. What is the nature of these luminous images that you are seeing, that you are experiencing? If your physical body is in the dark and your eyes are closed, where is this luminosity coming from where you can actually hear and you can see? The white star spring said, well, it's all in your mind. Actually, it's in your spirit because you're communicating with other Asunsum, other spirits. In the same fashion, when you make your transition, your body is laying in the dark, in the grave, and so forth, your spirit separates from the body, and you begin to interact with those same Asunsum, those same spirits in Asamando. The only difference is you won't be returning back to that physical body because there's a clean break, there was a detachment from the energy from that physical body. And now you're living in Asamando for however many generations you will live. If you live in harmony with order, as we showed in the text, and of course, those same concepts you find in the text, you find in the experience, no matter what ancestral religious expression you are involved in, whether it's Yoruba, Akan, Basa, Fula, Kudu, Juju, whatever it is, we have these experiences. So when you make your transition going to the ancestral realm, you have those experiences, just like you have pleasurable experiences, whether it's eating food, drinking water and tea or whatever it is, and sitting with your Nsamanfo in the dream world and so forth, having interactions that are harmonious, that are familial, that are communal. When you engage with the opposite sex in sexual endeavor, pleasurable experiences and so forth in the dream state, those same experiences we have in the spirit realm in the after-death state, and this is what they're talking about with regards to the sekhet hetep, the divine field sekhet of hetep, meaning peace, meaning balance, and the aru, the divine offerings, the divine food within the sekhet hetep. That means you're fed, you're fully rejuvenated, fully nourished. This is why they're talking about barley and beer and cakes and wine and everything else, and NETCHEM, which means pleasure, but NETCHEM also means sexual activity. So that same kind of arousal coming from the energy within your spirit, physically, the same kind of arousal and electromagnetic magnetism connection between spirits of opposite genders. As we talked about earlier in the broadcast, gender exists in the spirit realm, color exists in the spirit realm. Of course, it originates there, and the physical is just a physical manifestation of the spiritual. Just like spirits have sacred color. The Orisha, the Abosom, the Vodou have sacred color based on their movement through space. Certain Abosom, because of their energetic movement through space, they generate a bluish energy in space, and that's their sacred color based on their energy movement through space. Some are moving faster, and they generate a hot, fiery, reddish, orangish energy in space, and you see that glowing energy clairvoyantly. That's their sacred color because of their movement through space. Color originates in the spirit realm and manifests in the physical realm. Gender originates with the great mother and the great father, Amen and Amenet, Inyame and Inyamewa, originates the supreme being, manifests amongst the male and female Abosom forces in nature, and as well as the ancestresses and ancestors, and then we incarnate into the physical realm. And, of course, the proof of that is when you actually deal with your Nsamanfo, you deal with female ancestral spirit, male ancestral spirit. They're not genderless, so we dispose of all that nonsense. So, again, when we communicate and have direct experience, then we have knowledge. We have understanding. We're dealing with reality. And when we understand that we have a higher level of pleasure in the ancestral realm in all of its facets, then that's the final key to break the fear of doing what we need to do. So we wanted to establish that and give textual and ritual and cultural evidence for that so people can move forward and begin to embrace their ancestral culture fully without fear. We have one more call on the phone line. Okay, Michio, number 2843. You had a question or comment?
Yes, Machio. I'm so glad to hear you speak about this this evening because as I talk with friends and, look at what's going on in the world today, I think that, well, especially in society or here in the U.S., a lot of our people are confusing pleasure with lust. And I mean on many, many levels, such as, let's say, smoking marijuana to feel this great high and or engaging in pornography or whatever to feel pleasure where they think it's pleasure but it's really lust. And it just seems to be like a celebration with our people, this confusion of, as I see it, now I could be wrong, of pleasure versus lust. So, as I've been reading, going on this journey of reading, it's like everything is beginning to fall in place. And when you say divine order, there's a lot of energy behind it, and there's a lot of meaning behind that because that's what's wrong. If you're engaging in lust, then you're not in divine order. If you're engaging in pleasure in a perverse way, as I've heard you say, then you are out of order. But for some reason, when you talk about such as, let's go back to the lust thing, I was trying to explain to some people younger than me, they were talking about the porn and the pole dancing and somebody was retiring and whatever, et cetera. And, just grinning and drooling. I'm saying, so what's the meaning behind it? What's sacred behind it? What's sacred behind looking at a woman on a pole, et cetera, and you actually being in order with someone that you care deeply for on a sacred level? So, I don't know. I just wanted to make that comment.
No, we appreciate that, and that's absolutely correct. We have in our book, Mara Nechi, Divine Law, Love, and Divine Hate. Those are the two poles of divine order. So in that book, we go into detail about that. So law and love is the same word. So, for example, in Khanit and Kamit, in the Coptic dialect, the term for law is meh. The term for love.
And may I interrupt? Because when I read that, it didn't make sense to me, what was said. I have had to reread that booklet about 20 times. And let's say after the 20th, no, it's a good thing because I had to recondition my mindset. I had to recondition my brain, my soul. But after listening to, the audios and going back, for me, that's the type of learner I am. But then it all began to resonate. It all makes sense. And it just makes sense why we are so out of order. It just makes so much sense. So when I read or hear people talk about the word hate, I said, but hate is a good thing. If you just read this hate, there's a divine hate. But, it's a process. But that is a wonderful piece. Just absolutely nailed it.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. And for the individuals who may not be aware of that publication, so and I'm glad you were able to get the video that's the reason we did the broadcast, to, go through the book and clarify some concepts, because it, on one hand, it's new, but on the other hand, it's actually buried within your own cry. It's part of who we are, because it's divine order. So we're just expressing, divine order in reality, and we've been so bombarded with misinformation. But law and love is the same concept. So that's the reality, the expression of order. The perversion of law or love is lust. That's a misguided desire to engage in self-destructive activity. So if you're in love or in law with somebody, that's the same term. You're in love or you're in law with the individual. You're engaged in a harmonious, orderly reaction or interaction with the individual entity, or as well as an event. You're in law with them, law and love being the same word. Lust is a perversion of law or love. That's a misguided desire. Just like malice, an evil intent to destroy, is the perversion of hate. Hate is divine. Love and law is divine. Lust and malice are the perversions of law and hate. So when, for example, when you talk about somebody talking about, pornography and things like that, and they're trying to justify the perversity. And, some Negroes will try to give it something metaphysical and talk about the black goddess and all of that, and the reason they're engaged in going to strip clubs because they're honoring the great
Tantra and all of that. Yeah.
Right. So, people are idiots, and they know they're lying. We know they're lying, they know they're lying. They know they're lusting, we know they're lusting. So they're not fooling themselves, they're not fooling us. They're just saying things to make themselves feel good. But it's no different. They wouldn't, if they recognize the value of the female, for example, or sexual activity, and they say, well, we're just honoring the divine female, so this is the reason why we look at, pornography or go and do this and to stimulate our arousal because it's about divine order, which is insane.
Yeah.
Well, just like you have the two major drives that we have are the hunger drive and the sex drive. The hunger drive allows us to, perpetuate our existence, day to day. The sex drive allows us to perpetuate our existence intergenerationally, right? So those two major drives. Well, they're talking about the sex drive, and they're trying to make this metaphysical by engaging in a perversion, lust-filled approach with regard to the sex drive. Well, they're not doing the same thing with the hunger drive. They wouldn't go and get a bunch of different pictures and videos of food and sit around throwing, dollar bills at pictures of food, and it's stimulating their, making them salivate, and they're just looking at images of food all day long and turning on videos of cakes being baked, and they're salivating, and they're turning on music and throwing dollar bills at cake. You know what I'm saying? They're not doing that because they would see that as stupid, because you're looking at food, it's reminding you of the last time you ate some food, so you begin to salivate, but all you're doing is looking at food that you're not going to eat. So why would you sit around staring at food, getting videos of food, purchasing, downloading videos of food on the internet and lusting after food? If you want some food and you need some food that actually needs to nourish you, you go get some food that's nourishing. But you're not going to sit around looking at food and paying to look at food. There's no difference in somebody paying to look at somebody who's going to remind them of the last time they engaged in sexual activity. Idiotic. It's no different than paying to look at some food to salivate, and then saying you're honoring the great divinities of agriculture and the rivers and so forth because you're looking at food and wine. That's insane.
And what it appears to be is this is causing us to have a very insatiable appetite. So it's a never-ending cycle because you're never able to satisfy the core of that quote-unquote lust, okay? Whereas if you were in law with someone, then that would be satisfied, You wouldn't be like a dog chasing his tail. And that's what's so disheartening because at one time, you know, being at the point of life of where I'm at now, it was the drugs, but now it looks like it has, you know, white people have swapped it to make us, you know, think that it's okay, you know, to engage in such activities or to demean our men or to demean our children, you know, is you know, and I know there's hope. You know, you don't want to give up hope, and we're all part of this journey and trying to change things. I think that's what keeps me going. But it's just so good to have a reference point to say, well, go back and we'll go and look at this, reference this. If you don't believe me, try and look at this. So I appreciate that you have brought this before us, because it's something that is greatly needed to kind of rectify things within our community.
May I say, we appreciate, you know, the support. And not only is there hope, we are absolutely going to crush our enemies, and this is just the beginning. The whole strategy is already laid out by the Nsamanfo, and it's already encoded within the tribe of every Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit person to access that information of what we need to overcome all of these obstacles. And like you said there, first they did it with drugs in the 60s, 70s, and so forth, and got our people hooked on that, locked a bunch of our people up. Then they start promoting the whole porn thing, the whole stripper thing through hip-hop and so forth, which makes it an addiction. Anything lustful becomes an addiction, and then our people get hooked on that. Now they are bringing back the drugs in a different way, meaning they're going to begin to decriminalize not just marijuana, but they're going to decriminalize, you know, cocaine and everything else. And they're going to make that popular to make our people a nation of zombies. They had to set us up first to incarcerate us intergenerationally, then make us beg them to make drugs, you know, legal and, you know, something that we can go out and purchase them at dispensaries, and now we'll be paying money to the white offspring to purchase marijuana and later other drugs, make us, you know, totally dependent and addicted on these substances. They put out false studies to make our people believe there's nothing wrong with marijuana and everything else. So they'll have the porn, they'll have the drugs that are, you know, legal and free and everything. At the same time, while we get drugged up and destroying our sperm cells and destroying our ovum cells and, you know, children
destroying
being destroyed.
Our children, yes.
Right. And
destroying
and then,
our children big time.
Right, and not being able to work or even think about working because they're too lazy, because they're too busy smoking weed and destroying their melanin and everything else, as well as drawing in negative discarnate spirits because they're loosening their spiritual immunity. At the same time they're doing that, and our people aren't even able to get up and go to work, and they can't pass drug tests and everything else. Then at the same time, they're, you know, changing the quote-unquote immigration laws, so these millions of some of the other whites in our offspring, so-called Mexicans and everybody else, will now be legal. So all of us will lose the various jobs that we have. We won't be able to get any other jobs. We'll be too busy being smoked out, drugged out, and everything else.
And watching porn.
You know, the white mouth seem to be in control. So all these things are done in sync. And we need to recognize who the enemy is. And once we recognize who the enemy is, then we band together and establish our own independence.
Well, in reference to the hope, you said some things that my brother and I discuss all the time because he and I are both studying Ancestral Religion, and so that was confirmation for me in my soul. So, Madad say for that.
Okay, Yeni, I say that. We appreciate your support.
Okay, bye-bye.
That's it. Okay, so we it's about 11:30. So I'm gonna make sure we can stop here. I just want to make sure there was no other questions in the chat room. All right, so that's okay. So that's good. There was one comment in the chat room about someone was reading through the 42 Confessions of Innocence and felt like it wasn't going right, did a YouTube search, found the videos we did on the 42 enunciations of Ma'at, and then ever since then you were able to tune into the information. So, and that's another reason we put these. That was actually a Blog Talk Radio broadcast, and then we uploaded it as a video on YouTube, and that's one way we can get the information out to people. And then it's easy to share that information on your various sites. The YouTube links, sometimes the Blog Talk links aren't as readily available, and they have a hard time uploading, but if they're saved as YouTube videos, then they're saved. So this is the way we get that information out. So we appreciate, you connecting on that level. So, again, follow us on YouTube, subscribe to us on YouTube. We are ODWIRA on YouTube. Subscribe to us connect with us on Instagram at ODWIRA. Of course, on this Blog Talk channel, hit the follow button so you can be abreast of anything that's going on when we send out our notifications. Afuraitkaitnut on Facebook. You can type in ODWIRA, you can type in Afuraitkaitnut or Akan, you'll find us on Facebook. And then also our Afuraitkaitnut.ning.com website. That is our independent social media network, and you can join that and create a profile and so forth and connect with other individuals who are studying the same things. And also recall the final piece, we have the FECPU, Nananom study groups. When you go to the FECPU page on our website, it's talking about forming study groups around Nananom, and we have a curriculum. Anybody who you can start a study group with one or more people. It's your own independent thing. You're not up under our administration or anything like that. Any of our people can start a study group whenever you want. We do have a recommended curriculum beginning with the Kukutuntum. Anybody who's formed the study group or is part of the study group of FECPU, when you purchase books, they are automatically 30% off. So when you go to the FECPU page, FEKUW, on our website, odwira.com, you see the information about the FECPU, the Nananom study groups. There are different people forming them in different parts of the country, including in Philadelphia and in the Midwest and different places. So, and you'll also see those groups. Some of them have on our NETCHEM site, our network site, they have specific discussion forums on their study groups as well. So you can form that wherever you are. We do encourage people to begin to formulate study groups so that we can begin to study, like the previous caller said, study this information and begin to institutionalize this information. This is a key component of ancestral or nation building. We have a seven-part or seven principal values of nation building. We talk about methods of food production and preservation, methods of curing disease, military structure, institutionalizing our values through training institutions, also cultural institutions, educational institutions, establishing a sound systems of governance and jurisprudence, building homes on acquired land, and also creating our own clothing. So all these various principal values of nation building, one of them is the establishment of institutions. And that's key, because in order to have the methods of food production and preservation, you have to have an institutional process whereby you teach people how to do that. In order to establish systems of curing disease, you need to have institutions that teach people how to cure disease. In order to have sound systems of governance and jurisprudence, you must have institutions to teach our systems of governance and jurisprudence. The same thing with the military structure, defense and so forth. The same thing with the building of homes and engineering and so forth on acquired land. Same thing with making clothing and building with textiles and so forth. We need to have institutions that institutionalize our values, what is important, teaching our people why our nation is important, why it's important for us to establish a nation. And once people understand the value of the nation, then they will defend the nation and they will seek to perpetuate the nation. And part of institutionalizing our values are having training, educational institutions, as well as cultural institutions that reinforce our values, that institutionalize them and reinforce them on a consistent basis. So every person in the nation, male and female, child and adult, values what we have built and seeks to protect and defend what we have built, and recognizes not purely in a political sense, in a spiritual sense, that we come into the world naturally inclined to form into certain communes based on our ancestral blood circle, based on the abosom that govern us, and we're naturally inclined towards certain kinds of behavior, whether it's military, whether it's agricultural, whether it's healing, whether it's governance, whether it's engineering, whether it's teaching, institution building, whether it's dealing with textiles. We're naturally inclined to these things based on the abosom that govern us and the energy complexes that we have, and that's the spiritual foundation of coalescing these principles of nation building. So we're engaged in that process of institution building. So again, yet I'll say for those who have been supporting and those who will support, go to our publications page, purchase the soft-cover versions of our publications and to support the work that we are doing, as well as to assist those others who would like to be distributors. And again, yet I'll say we thank you for tuning in. We will be on tomorrow again. So, Yebeshi Abio, we will meet again. It's up.